Hello, a very good day, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Abhilash, and I am from the AD Solutions team here at Manage Engine, and I would be your presenter for today. So yes, today's topic is Active Directory under attack from zero access to domain admin in 40 minutes, right? So we are going to take a look at 10 Active Directory attacks today, 10 trending attacks, 10 popular attacks that are being used right now, and we will learn how to fend ourselves, how to fend our people, how to fend our organization's IT from such attacks. All right. So before we get started, why did I choose to speak about this topic today? Why Active Directory? Why domain admin? Right. Now, it's no secret that Active Directory has been the single point of authentication and authorization for many enterprises for many decades now. I believe Active Directory started off in the year 2000. This is 2020. That's more than 15 years of using Active Directory as a major point of authentication and authorization for resources that are located on premises, and to an extent, resources that are located in the cloud as well. Right? So it's no secret that Active Directory has been around for a very long time. And we have spent most of our efforts, we've spent most of our money, our valuable time on securing the network perimeter of the organization, securing the firewall, securing the network perimeter, checking for intrusions from the external network perimeter. And this is important, this is vital. I'm not belittling the fact that securing your network perimeter is not that important. But the truth is, most organizations that use Active Directory still tend to miss or tend to oversee the importance of Active Directory security. Now, Active Directory holds the crown jewels of your organization, right? Active Directory holds your domain administrators, your enterprise administrators, your privileged users. Active Directory is directly responsible for giving access to your end users to the privileged, sensitive, and critical resources in your organization. Now, attacks can be external to the network, or an insider can go rogue. It could be a malicious insider as well. The ultimate goal of any attack, external or internal, is to gain the highest access in the lowest time possible. And what is the highest access? Domain administrator. Because if an attacker has access to a domain admin account, he or she will have complete administrative control over the Active Directory domain or over the Active Directory forest. All right, so let's take a look at what we will be discussing today. We'll take a brief look at the domain user to the domain admin lifecycle. How do attackers basically go from an end user to a domain admin in most Active Directory based attacks? We'll take a look at a list of misconfigurations and administrative errors that lead to attacks in Active Directory. Like I said, we will be taking a look at 10 popular or 10 trending Active Directory attacks. We will simulate a few attacks live in this webinar, if time permits, as much as possible. And we will see how attackers actually employ tactics to escalate privileges from that of an end user to that of a domain admin. And last but not the least, we'll employ a comprehensive security strategy to safeguard your domain administrators, and not just your domain admins, any privileged account in Active Directory from misuse or abuse or compromise. All right. So the domain user and the domain admin lifecycle, or the kill chain. How does an attacker go from an end user to a domain admin? It's pretty classic. The classics are still in play here, right? So most ransomware attacks, most Active Directory based attacks start off with a phishing email. So a phishing email, an infected document, malware drops onto the end user system. The end user is unaware of the malware, and the malware gradually spreads through the entire organization's network. That's how it always starts, right? And if it is an internal user, it could be a simple password spray attack. So attackers external to the network typically get in using phishing or social engineering attacks. Attackers internal to the network simply try to obtain credentials, right? Try to obtain passwords. And once they do, the lateral movement starts. So an attacker basically starts from an endpoint, moves on to a system that is higher up in the network hierarchy, and gradually climbs up the ladder until he or she has access to an account or to a server that has complete administrative control over Active Directory. Right? So once an attacker has access to an endpoint in an organization, typically it takes only 24 to 48 hours for the attacker to become a domain admin. Right? Just a time period of a day or 2 days, and an attacker already has domain admin credentials. The reality is it doesn't take long for attackers to go from domain end user to domain admin. But the question that we need to ask ourselves, that the question that we need to know is, how exactly do attackers do it? Right? Or how can we stop this? I'm pretty sure we would have heard of this. Attackers compromise endpoints and gradually compromise Active Directory. It's been all over the news. We've been reading headlines, but how do they exactly do it? What tactics do they employ? And how do we detect such attacks on Active Directory? Right? So what opens gates to an attacker? Now, I told you that attackers go from an endpoint to a domain administrator account, but what exactly opens gates to an attacker? My answer to that question, my single answer that I give anybody who asks me that question, is misconfigurations, administrative errors, things that have been left unchanged for a long, long time. Right? These are the popular reasons why attackers can gain access to your internal network. There may be permissions that your end users have that they're not supposed to have, that they were probably assigned on a temporary basis, but were not revoked on time. There may be settings in Active Directory that are outdated, but they haven't been updated in a long, long time. A classic example of that is your local administrator passwords. Right? Users may have group memberships, users may have security permissions that they may have been assigned, but they haven't been changed in a long time. So human errors, unrevoked permissions, outdated settings, failing to update, failing to patch settings can open gates to an attacker. And last but not the least, Active Directory itself comes in with its own set of vulnerabilities. Like any IT administration software or service, Active Directory also has a few vulnerabilities that are built into it that attackers eventually discover, and they perform attacks, and only then Microsoft patches or fixes those vulnerabilities. Right? I would encourage you to check out this creative right here. So this creative basically shows you the different ways accounts in Active Directory can be leveraged, right? Or various accounts in Active Directory can be exploited in breaches. This is something I've written. This is a simple ebook. All you got to do is just download it. And this way you can find out the different accounts in Active Directory and how it can be compromised. All right, so getting back to the matter at hand, let's see what we have in store for us. So we are going to look at 10 attacks right now. I'm going to quickly go through them so our time permits as well, and we'll see how Active Directory can be exploited. So the first attack we've got here is the zero logon attack within Active Directory. So if you can recollect what I told you in the previous slide, Active Directory comes in with its own set of vulnerabilities that attackers eventually discover. Right? So the first default vulnerability in Active Directory is the net logon protocol. So I won't be getting into the details of this, but in a nutshell, this is how it works, right? So any domain joined computer authenticates with the Active Directory domain controller using a protocol called the net logon protocol. Right? So this is the net logon handshake process where a client basically sends an 8-byte challenge. Server returns back an 8-byte challenge, and a session key is made using the challenge that we see right here and a hash of the client system's password. And once the session key is made, the session key and the client challenge are together used to create a client credentials, and the session key and the server challenge are together used to create a server credential. Right? Now, this is a vulnerability within the net logon protocol within Active Directory. Net logon protocol is basically authenticates and authorizes end user systems, or basically servers within an organization, to authenticate with the domain controller. Now the net logon protocol has a flaw namely in the AES encryption part of the NetLogon protocol, where a client system could simply send null values, right? So a client system could simply send 0000, and eventually a client system could authenticate to a domain controller with an empty string password. So the entire NetLogon handshake process that we saw right here can be infected because of a simple flaw within the NetLogon protocol, where a client could send null values or zeros to the server, thereby authenticating itself with an empty password. Now, the beauty of this attack is that not only the client system, any member server within the organization can be impersonated with an empty password or a null string password, right? Not just a member server, but even domain controllers as well can be impersonated. That's the reason this particular vulnerability is called a zero logon vulnerability, because we are sending null values as a challenge during the authentication process. Thereby, an attacker doesn't have to enter a password for any system in order to authenticate with the domain controller. So an attacker will be able to impersonate any system in the organization, including the domain controller. Now, the fix for this is right here. There is a patch that Microsoft has released. I would encourage you to check out the patch and patch all your domain controllers right from Windows Server 2008 as soon as possible. This is a vulnerability that just came out, and I would encourage you to patch your domain controllers as soon as possible. All right, so that's the first attack that we have here, the default vulnerability within AD, where an external user, that's right, a user who's not a part of the domain, can basically authenticate himself or herself as any server within the network. The only prerequisite for this attack is that the user has to be connected to the organization network. That's it. The user does not have to be a part of the same domain. All right. The second attack we're going to look into is an internal attack. Now, I told you that an external attack can be a phishing attack or can be an exploitation of the vulnerability, such as zero logon vulnerability. The important thing to realize is that your internal users or your non-privileged users have a couple of vulnerabilities as well. Right? So let me show you what I mean by that. If I, oops, yes, so here we were. So this is how it's going to work, right? So let me quickly head on to my VM right here. And let me show you a simple thing that your end users with no privileges can do with an Active Directory. Right, so this is my PowerShell session. I'm quickly going to increase the size so you can view this a little better. Here we go. All right, so I'm logged in as a user called Ross. And if I give a net user Ross, these are Ross's privileges. You can see that Ross is not an administrator or a privileged user of any kind, just a standard domain user. At least that's what Active Directory tells me. Now, let me show you what Ross can do, right? So what I'm going to try and do now is to try and get the domains password policy. Pretty straightforward command run by an end user with no privileges. And here I have a password policy of the domain with which I can perform password spray or password brute force attacks on the domain, because I know how long the password should be or what's the minimum and the maximum length of the passwords. I've got those details right here. Right? So the list simply doesn't end here. For example, I can run a command called, here, let me quickly show that to you. This is a command to basically find out all the security groups on my domain. Right? So I'm just going to copy this command as an end user again with no privileges whatsoever, and I'm going to paste it. And this gives me all the groups on my domain. Right now, within the PowerShell session, all I got to do is click edit, hit find, and let's see if there's any admin group. Here we go. We've got a DNS admins group. They're all default groups. We've got our AD sync admin groups. We've got our default administrators group. We've got our Hyper-V administrators group. We've got our schema admins, enterprise admins. The list simply goes on, right? So this is a way, as an end user, I can find out the security groups within Active Directory. And now let me show you what I can do with this information. Right? So I have a list of groups within Active Directory, namely the admin groups or the security groups. And let me show you how, as an end user with no knowledge whatsoever, I could launch an attack in Active Directory. All right, so I'm just going to open up PowerShell again, and I'm going to clear this, and I'm going to head to the desktop, and I'm going to run a command called PowerShell.exe-exec and then bypass. Now this is a command that will allow me as an end user to execute any script that I want in Active Directory, irrespective of my privileges. All right, so I've run that, and you can see that I've got a script here called power up. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to import the script. I'm going to do import module./powerup.ps1, and I'm going to run a command called invoke all checks. So what's going to happen now is that this user's privileges are checked. So if the user has any unwanted privilege assigned to him, that particular privilege can be exploited. All right, now here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to run a command called write user add MSI, and once I hit enter, this is what's going to happen. Right, if I minimize this, you will see that there is an MSI file on the desktop. So that's what the command does. It basically pushes out an MSI file onto the desktop. And what does the MSI file do? The file will allow you to add any backdoor user to any administrative group within Active Directory. So this is how it's going to work. Let's say I'm going to name the user server administrator. So this is going to be a stealthy way of adding it. So an admin will never realize that this user is a potential malicious user. So I'm just going to type in server administrator. I want to add the user to the administrators group, hit create. And when I do this, so let me just, once I hit create, this is what's going to happen, right? So let me quickly show that to you. If I type in net local group administrators, all I'm trying to do is query the administrator group memberships. Here we have our serve_admin user in the administrators group of Active Directory, right? Now, how could this happen? How could an end user simply query for groups within Active Directory, especially security groups, simply run a script, launch an MSI application, and add a backdoor user to any administrative group within Active Directory? It's that simple. How could this have happened? Do you see this option right here? When we perform the privilege check for the user, there was an option right here that says always install elevated is enabled for this machine. What does that mean? So let me quickly show you what that means to you. If I head on to my group policies, right, this is my default domain policy. I'm going to hit edit. I'm going to head into computer configuration, policies, administrative templates, Windows components, and I've got something called Windows installer right here. And do you see this option, always install with elevated privileges? This basically allows your end users to install any MSI application or a Windows installer application with administrative rights. Right? Now, the application that we just ran was able to execute, this particular application was able to execute because the user had administrative privileges. This wouldn't have been possible if the user didn't have administrative privileges. So if we ran this, it would have prompted us to enter admin credentials, but because the group policy setting was enabled, the user was able to add a backdoor user into Active Directory. Right? And that happened because of a simple misconfiguration like we just saw, the group policy privilege that was granted to the system. Now the misconfiguration could be anything, right? This is just one single example right here. So this is when we can help you. This is when Log360 comes in. For those of you who are new to Log360, Log360 is an auditing and a log management solution for your hybrid Active Directory environments. So if auditing the security changes on your Active Directory, on your Azure infrastructure is more of importance, we can help you with that. If looking into your logs from various network devices in your organization, looking for anomalies, catching sensitive activities and suspicious activities, we can help you with that as well. The list simply goes on, but for today's webinar scope, we will be looking into AD Audit Plus, a real-time auditing solution for Active Directory, and we will be looking into Event Log Analyzer, a log management and a log searching, a log filtering, and a log monitoring solution for your Active Directory, and not just your Active Directory, but your entire network as well. Right? So this is how AD Audit Plus can help. So if I head into reports right here, and if I scroll down, you will see something called group policy settings changes right here. And if I head into Windows settings changes or administrative template changes, click on show details, you will see all the group policies that were enabled while you were away. It could be by a help desk, it could be another admin who simply made a process mistake. The reason could be anything, but it's important that you notice these changes, and AD Audit Plus, a component of Law 360, can help you with that. All right, if I head into server audit right here, and if I scroll down, you will find something called PowerShell auditing. So if I click on, let's say, script block logging right here, you can find out all the scripts that were executed by your end users. So if Ross, it belongs to the marketing department and he or she is not supposed to execute a script, but he or she has, you can detect those activities. You can detect the data of the script, meaning the code block within the script as well with AD Audit Plus. You can audit certain modules that are being logged within Active Directory for the scripts that your end users are executing within AD Audit Plus. And not just that, all of this data is completely searchable. So if you want to search for a particular user, if he or she is running a script, you can do that. If you want to read into the script data, you can do that. And all of the alerts that we just saw can be configured into alerts, right? These are not just reports, but you can configure custom alerts for these reports as well. Where you can set threshold based alerts, meaning if there are more than 10 events happening within of so-and-so time, you can schedule an alert, right? If a particular user belonging to a particular department is running a script that he or she is not supposed to run, and the script data has so-and-so information, the code block of the script is so-and-so, you can configure an alert for that. You can alert an admin, a help desk technician via email, via SMS, and you can execute a mitigation script. Now, a mitigation script is something that detects if your users are performing malicious activities, and the mitigation script will basically terminate the user's session or disable the user's account, right? So AD Audit Plus can help you with activities such as that, because AD Audit Plus is capable of monitoring your group policy changes. It's capable of reading into malicious scripts when your users run it. It is also capable of capturing enumeration attempts. For example, get AD default domain password policy, get AD group members, right? So activities such as that can also be detected with AD Audit Plus, and you can set up alerts as well. All right. Now, the third thing we're going to look into is other ways your group policies can be exploited. We saw one way how a single group policy option could lead to a full-blown attack in Active Directory, but the truth is group policies are a very mismanaged thing in most Active Directory infrastructures, right? A simple example that you see right here is the delegation tab within group policies. So if I head on to my group policies, and if I open up my group policy console right here, this is my default domain policy and delegation. And most of the time, users who are not supposed to have privileges here actually have privileges here. What do I mean by that? Let me quickly show you. If I add a user, let's say I'm going to call the user Ross. Here we go. And I'm going to give Ross edit settings privileges for the default domain policy. Right? So this is how mistakes happen. This is how users or groups end up having edit privileges on the group policies, using which they can enable various settings within the group policy. For example, the always install elevated privilege that we just saw. And this is how misconfigurations lead to attacks within Active Directory, right? There are many, many ways group policies can be leveraged for attacks. For example, a user or an attacker could simply configure a logon script, right, in the group policies, a script that basically takes screenshots of your end user sessions. So all the screenshots will be taken, all the screenshots will be dumped into one single location that the attacker can later come into and go through the screenshots to find confidential information or credentials. The list simply goes on, right? Group policies have user rights assignments options that can be exploited as well, right? So why are these options exploited? Because they look like this. There is no way an administrator or a help desk can simply look at all these options and find out what's wrong with these options, right? Allow log on to remote desktop services. If this is enabled on a domain controller, an end user can simply log on to a domain controller. Backup files directories. This option can give an end user administrative rights to backup files and directories. But my question is simple. How do you know if the end user is actually backing up the files or directories, or if the end user is stealing the data within the files and directories, right? Manage auditing and security log, an option that you see right here, will allow a user to erase audited events within Active Directory, thereby removing all traces of a potential attack. The structure is messy, and that's how mistakes happen, that's how misconfigurations happen, and that's what leads to breaches, right? Group policies are also a central point for ransomware propagation. The sysvol folder on your domain controller, I am pretty sure you would have known this. The sysvol folder is responsible for propagating group policy settings to all servers in the organization. And ransomwares have noticed that, and they are leveraging the sysvol folder to basically spread ransomware across every node in the network. A good example of that ransomware is the Snake ransomware or the ECANS ransomware, because it uses the sysvol folder of the domain controller to propagate itself to every other node in the network, right? So this is where AD Audit Plus can help, because AD Audit Plus is capable of capturing group policy changes across your Active Directory environment. So if your administrative template changes, if your user rights assignments changes, if things like that happen, AD Audit Plus will immediately capture those changes, and AD Audit Plus can alert on them via email, via SMS, and also run a mitigation action. So if you're away, and if something suspicious happens, AD Audit Plus can simply terminate the user session or shut down the user system. All right. AD Audit Plus is also capable of monitoring the sysvol folder of your domain controller. So if an endpoint in your organization is potentially infected with ransomware, right, the sysvol folder can be a good starting point to monitor an entry of any ransomware in your organization, because that's where most ransomware spread. So by monitoring the sysvol folder for file creations or file modifications or file deletions, you can find out if there is a potential ransomware attack on your organization, and you can cut it off in time before it spreads to your other systems, before it spreads to your other nodes in the network, right? So this is the third attack. The fourth thing we're going to look into is admin credential extraction from an endpoint machine, right? Now, typically in Active Directory, when Active Directory is administered, administrators log on to a workstation, right, to probably manage the workstation, or to reset its passwords, or to set some policies on that workstation. Administrators may log on to guest machines, again, with the sole purpose of configuring them or updating them or patching them. Administrators may run runas on workstations. Administrators may remotely log on to workstations via a domain admin account. And whenever an admin logs onto a workstation, either interactively or remotely, or even does a simple right click and run as, the credentials will be dropped into the local memory or the LSASS, right? So what can be done with that? It's pretty straightforward. So let me show you how this attack happens. If I minimize this, I have a quick video right here that I wish to show you. Now I can't perform this attack live because I would immediately get a call from my system administrator, but this is how it would work, right? So what we're trying to do here is we are trying to extract passwords from a local memory or the LSA of an endpoint within an organization, right? Because an admin at some point could have or would have logged on to the endpoint for whatever reason it may be. Right? So here's what's going to happen. I'm trying to look into the local memory for the passwords, and all the passwords are right here, all dumped to a text file. And once I get the text file, I can find users and I can get their password hashes, right? As you can see right here. Here is the hash of a user called James within Active Directory. But the problem with this attack is that it is a post-exploitation attack, meaning an attacker needs administrative privileges to perform this attack, right? So this is not really a zero access to a domain admin attack, but this is how attackers are doing it these days. So let me show you a quick example right here. If I open up my task manager on my system, this is my endpoint, and an admin would have logged on to my endpoint at some time, right? So I'm going to head into details, and I'm going to look at the LSASS process, and I'm going to create a dump file. So when I create a dump file, I can take that dump file, copy it in a pen drive, or send it to myself over email, or put it on my drive, and I can take that dump file later to my own system, to my attacker system, and I can pass that dump file for any credentials, right? So this way, I don't need access to a domain controller. I don't need to be an administrator. All I need is a dump of the LSASS process, and I am good to go. Right? So I can basically take the dump file, extract it at my own leisure from my own server or system, and I can get password hashes of the domain I'm trying to extract the hashes from. How do we detect this particular? We have to monitor the processes within Active Directory. Now, any of you who would have seen the event viewer obviously know that there are a lot of processes that are generated in Active Directory. As you can see, this is my endpoint, just my system, and there are close to 130,000 processes right here. Right? So how do we detect LSASS dump attempts or LSASS extraction attempts? How do we detect that? Log360 can help you with that, right? Because Log360 is capable of parsing your log files, filtering them for particular events, right? So this is something Active Directory cannot do. Active Directory just dumps events into one location and leaves you to be. But Log360 can help you with that, because Log360 can potentially take all of those events, all of the 1 lakh events that we just saw here, and run through them to detect malicious, and not just malicious, but sensitive and also suspicious activity. So this is how it would work. If I head on to my event log analyzer, a component of Log360, click on search. Right? So I'm going to pick a device right here, and I'm just going to add a device. And if I click on advanced, so let me quickly log back in here. Head into search, right? So I'm going to search logs across my Windows systems or any other device in my network. I'm just going to select a system right here, happens to be my domain controller. I'm going to click on advanced, right? And here is where I can set a condition to search for specific logs within Active Directory. So I can set a particular condition. It could be an and or based condition. Once I find the logs, I can configure alerts within Active Directory. Right, so that's how Log360 can help, because sometimes logs are not all that informative. Logs are bizarre. There are a high volume of logs produced. Logs not all the time give you the information that you need, but by using Log360, you can pass through specific logs and find information, find the sensitive activity or the security event that you're looking for, and set up alerts. So once you set up an alert, you're good to go. If there is ever an LSASS dump attempt on your Active Directory environment, you will be notified immediately. All right. The fifth thing we're going to look into is misconfigured security permissions in Active Directory. Now, this is a problem that happens many times within Active Directory, and this is how it works. Right? Now, how do you delegate permissions within Active Directory? This is how you typically delegate permissions, right? So you head on to your Active Directory users and computers tool, you right click on it, you hit delegate control, and this is where you delegate permissions to your end users within Active Directory, right? Or you could also just select an object. Let's say this auditors group right here, you right click on it, you hit on properties, and you explicitly add an ACE or an ACL entry to the objects that you see right here. right? So these are two ways delegations are performed. You can use the delegation control wizard. You can explicitly grant permissions, but no matter how you do it, the security descriptors, meaning the DACL or the DACL of security objects are what are modified here with an Active Directory. This is what is modified, right? Regardless of the procedure you use to perform delegations or give your users additional permissions, right? Now let's see how a simple unnoticed permission could lead to a breach with an Active Directory. So I'm going to show you a quick example right here. If I head on to my VM, minimize this, quickly minimize this, cancel this. I have Mimikatz right here. Now you could argue that Mimikatz is banned by most organizations, but I would say it's just code. So you can recode, you can redesign Mimikatz, and you could always run it however you wanted to. You could always obfuscate Mimikatz to avoid detection. And this is how the attack would work, right? So I'm just going to clear this, and I am going to shift to the Mimikatz directory, and I will be running Mimikatz right here. And now I'm going to run a simple command called lsa dump dc sync. All right, I'm going to give in a username, user who happens, no, I'm going to give it my domain name, which happens to be wsmpda.com. And I'm going to give in my username, who happens to be, let's say, an administrator. Right? Now, the domain name, the username can always be queried from Active Directory, just a few commands. You can get the names of the people, right? Once you get the names of the people, this is how the attack will work. Do you see the NTLM hash right here? So what I'm going to do now is just take the hash, right, that I just acquired from a user with an Active Directory, and I'm going to head on to my browser. I'm going to search for crackstation.net. I'm going to paste the hash right here. Click I'm not a robot. All right, let's just do this. And once I hit crack hashes, I've cracked the hashes of the hash that we just found using Mimikatz in Active Directory. Right, so this is how the attack panned out. We were able to request the changes from a domain controller from an end user's account, right? So how could this happen? How did this exactly happen? The reason this happened is because of this. So if I head on to my Active Directory users and computers, right? This is my domain. I'm going to right click on it, properties, head into security, and let me see if I've got my user Ross right here. I should be. Here I have Ross. And if I scroll down, here we go. Do you see these two permissions? Replicating directory changes, replicating directory changes all, replicating directory changes and filtered set. Now these permissions allow my end user to basically query the changes that are being replicated between domain controllers with an Active Directory. Right? These are the permissions that Active Directory uses to update its domain controllers of the changes that are happening between them. But in this case, an end user who was assigned this privilege, God knows how, was able to extract password hashes from the domain, right? Simply by disguising himself as a domain controller who's actually requesting for changes. Right? So just a simple permission on the domain node, the replicating directory changes permission caused this attack, and AD Audit Plus can help you detect those changes as well. So if I have, let me quickly open up AD Audit Plus and show you how this works. So this is AD Audit Plus. I'm going to head into reports right here. And if I scroll down, you will see something called permission changes. Right? If I click on domain level permission changes, you see that Tom has made a change. And if I further scroll down and click on more, you will see that the changes, you'll see the changes that are given to your users. In this case, the user Luna has been granted replicating directory changes permissions, and that's how she was able to request for password hashes. So changes that such as this on the domain level must be detected and must be alerted upon, and not just on the domain level, basically on any security object in your Active Directory. If there is an explicit ACE added to your security objects, that must be captured, that must be detected upon, and AD Audit Plus can help you with that. All right, which brings me to my second example. Have you noticed this admin ST holder right here? So if you head into your Active Directory users and computers tool and the systems OU right here, you've got something called the admin ST holder. Right? So any user who has a permission on the admin SD holder, right? It could be full control. It could be any permissions that users may have. In this case, you can see DOS has full control over this OU, will have permissions on all protected objects within Active Directory. These are a list of protected objects within Active Directory, and a permission on the admin SD holder will automatically update permissions on all of these protected objects. Now, the reason that happens is because admin SD holder is responsible for managing permissions on these objects, right? So an end user with privileges to the ADUC tool could simply modify permissions on this particular container, give himself or another user full control permissions or modify permissions, and those permissions would apply to all protected groups within Active Directory. Right? Now, if an admin finds out a permission, and if the admin, let's say, if I head on to my DC right here, and the admin finds out that on the domain admins group, right, there is a permission that a user is not supposed to have, which is not right. So the admin basically goes down to the group, selects the permission and removes the permission and applies it, right? So the admin has found out that there is a fault, the admin removes the permission, but then again, there is a default process within Active Directory called the SDPROP process, right? So the SDPROP process basically checks the admin SD holder for permissions and updates all the protected objects within Active Directory. The protected objects are these, right? So if an admin finds out that a permission has been assigned that a user is not supposed to have, SDPROP will automatically re-update the permissions, even if they've been removed, right? So this is a default function within Active Directory. This cannot be eliminated, this cannot be deleted, this cannot be disabled. That's how Active Directory works, and this is how misconfigurations lead to breaches. Right? So even if an admin sees, oh my God, there's a wrong permission on the domain admin group, and the admin removes it, within 60 minutes, the permission is back again, and you can use a script to basically invoke the change, right? Invoke the SDPROP mechanism within Active Directory to update permissions on all of these objects whenever you want it. So AD Audit Plus, a component of Log360, can help you with that, because AD Audit Plus can capture changes on all your security objects, explicit ACE changes that have been added, and alert on them. Right? Sixth thing we're going to look into is unwanted security group memberships within Active Directory. Now, what do I mean by this? Active Directory has a lot of groups, domain admins, enterprise admins. The list simply goes on, and these group memberships must be monitored. Group memberships can be direct. Group memberships can also be nested. For example, Group A can be nested into Group B, and Group B may have access to sensitive resources, right? But via nested privileges, Group B can get effective access on these resources. Group B was never directly granted access to these resources, but it happened via nested privileges. So monitoring nested group memberships is important as well. Watch your group memberships across your domains. If you have multiple domain controllers, watch your cross-platform group memberships as well, right? For example, Exchange Windows permissions gives the user direct control over the domain node. So any user who's a member of this particular group, right, has direct write access on the domain node. And what can we do on the domain node? The attack that we just performed earlier. You could give a user replicating directory changes permissions, or you could simply give a user the right to modify domain password and lockout policies. Right? So there are groups that end up giving your user privileges that they may not need, and that's something that has to be checked in as well. Right? There's another group called the Exchange Server Group that is by default a member of the auditing and the security log properties within user rights assignment in GPO. So basically this group has the right to clear the security log of the domain. Any user who's a member of this group can clear the security log of the domain, remove traces of suspicious activities, and that's something that has to be looked into as well. So in a nutshell, Look into group memberships, look into indirect group memberships, look into cross-platform group memberships like Exchange group memberships, look into cross-domain group memberships, look into your default group memberships like your domain admins, enterprise admins, etc., and look into your groups that have access to privileged resources or privileged applications within Active Directory, right? And AD Audit Plus can help you with that as well. So if I head into AD Audit Plus, and you see that we've got something called group management right here. And over here, you can find out users when they're added from groups, when they're removed from groups, when the ACEs or the ACLs of groups are modified, the list simply goes on, and you can configure alerts as well. So every group-based membership addition, removal, ACL changes, group attribute changes are all recorded right here, and you can configure alerts as well, right? Now, the next thing we're going to look into is your files or folders, because without looking into files or folders, Active Directory is truly never secure, right? So you will have to monitor permissions on your files or folders, users who may have file ownership permissions, users who may have inherited full control or change or modify permissions from another file or folder, files when they are copied, when they are moved, when they are deleted, have to be looked into, and AD Audit Plus can help you with that as well. So if I head into file audit, right, this will help you monitor changes across your files or folders. So if a particular file or folder permission has been changed, if the ACL has been changed, if a file or folder has been deleted, if a file or folder has been read, or if a file or folder has been moved, copied, the list simply goes on. All of those changes will be brought to notice here across your Windows file or folders, across your shares, across your servers, and you can configure alerts. And not just that, AD Audit Plus is also capable of looking into your core file or folders. For example, your root, your C file or folder, your sysvol folder, your database file or folder, your application file or folder, any folder file or folders that are responsible for configuration within your Active Directory environment, regardless of the server, have to be looked into, and AD Audit Plus can help you with that as well with a file integrity module. So as you can see, all your root folders will be looked into. You can set up customized file or folder reports, you can configure alerts, and you can monitor file or folder changes across domains, right? So monitoring file or folder changes is crucial, is extremely important. But another thing I wanted to speak about is this particular attack that has been gaining a lot of traction, right? Now, let me show you a simple example right here. If I head on to a particular PowerShell script here, right? So what this script does is it basically generates infected Office macros. So let me show you something right here. So this is my Excel macro. If I open it, you will see it looks like a general empty Excel file, but then in the background, a calculator application launches, right? Now, for example, I showed you a calculator, but it could be any malicious executable. It could even be Mimikatz. It could be a script that is added to the group policies, a script to basically take screenshots of the user system, or a keylogger script. The list could simply go on. And these infected documents are randomly dropped by attackers, right, in network shares with an organization. And once a user clicks on the network share, what happens is that the attacker system will gain complete control over the victim system. Right, this is something that's happening a lot. So there are scripts that will help you generate malicious macros, and there are basically ways where an attacker could gain control of an end user system, could gain complete control, or when the end user basically clicks on the Excel file or opens it, the end user's password hashes will be dumped onto the attacker system, right? So that's something that has to be looked into as well. And Log360 can help you detect malicious file or folder manipulation, permission changes, files when they are added to network shares, files when they are removed from network shares across your servers in your organization, and also monitor your core configuration file or folders for file or folder additions, modifications, deletions, or removals. Now, the eighth thing we're going to look into is the ntds.dit attack. The ntds.dit attack is something that is still existent. It's a pretty old school trick, but it still exists a lot in most Active Directory organizations. And that's because an attacker can simply create a copy of the ntds.dit file and extract it for passwords. So how can an attacker, without being a domain admin, get a copy of the ntds.dit file, right? I'm pretty sure you know of this. The ntds.dit file is on the domain controller, and you'll have to log on to a domain controller to obtain a copy of it. But there are many misconfigurations that allow an attacker to gain access to the ntds.dit file. For example, whenever member servers are promoted to domain controllers, right? So in order to avoid creating data in them all over again, in order to avoid bringing them up from scratch, there are copies of ntds.dit files on the member servers that are in them before promoting them to domain controllers that could potentially be used to extract passwords, right? Domain controllers are backed up, and those DC backups can be leveraged to get copies of the ntds.dit files, because these backups are typically stored on a backup share, and any user with the access to the share can simply take the ntds.dit file and extract it for passwords. And if you have your DCs hosted on a virtual machine, you can clone that DC and you can copy down the data onto a local hard drive. Right? So an attacker basically gains access to a DC. The attacker creates a volume shadow copy of the DC, right? So the ntds.dit file cannot be opened by your attacker. So all they got to do is they have to create a volume shadow copy of the ntds.dit file, and then they can basically crack the volume shadow copy, get end users password hashes. And these are a list of places where the ntds.dit file can be found by attackers. And my recommendation would be to look into these places and ensure that the permissions to these particular folders or these particular locations are secure, right? Log360 can help you with that as well, because using Log360, you can set up customized alerts to basically get ntds.dit extraction attempts, capture them from Active Directory and alert on them, right? Using condition-based alerts that I just showed you. The ninth thing we're going to look into is attribute values of objects. So user accounts in Active Directories generally have a lot of attributes, right? For example, a user with a password never expires attribute. Users with log on to rights to a domain controller, or Kerberos unconstrained delegation enabled on many systems, explicit ACEs or ACLs. My point here being, you will have to monitor attribute changes across systems in your organization, right? Across users in your organization. So this is what I mean. If I head on to my ADUC tool right here, and let's say admin, and let me just open up an admin, let's say Jesse. I'm going to right click, head into properties, and there are many attributes here that can be used for privilege escalation. For example, if Jesse has log on to rights to a domain controller, and if Jesse's account is compromised, an attacker could basically log on to a domain controller using Jesse's account. If Jesse has password never expires or user cannot change password enabled, an attacker could perform a password spray attack on Jesse and get the plain text password, right? If Jesse can control any remote system within the organization, those changes can be exploited by attackers as well. The list simply goes on, and my point here is you will have to look into attribute changes for every object within your organization, right? Another example for this is your computer account. So if I head into computers, I've got my computer right here. I'm going to right click on it, head into properties, and basically head into where is it, delegation. And if this particular option is enabled, right? Kerberos unconstrained delegation. If there's an option like that enabled, then an attacker can simply get password hashes of any user who's ever connected to that system via interactive logon, via remote logon. The list simply goes on, and AD Audit Plus can help you detect those changes. All you got to do is head into reports, and you've got something called user management reports that will help you capture any sensitive activity on your user accounts, right? If a password has been changed, a password has been reset, if a password never expires value is set for your users, if a user account has a particular ACE or an ACL added, right? So if someone has full control over a user account and this was explicitly added, changes such as that can be detected, and not just for users, for your groups, for your computers, for your organizational units. So for your every object, monitoring critical attribute changes that may lead to privilege escalation is a mandate, and AD Audit Plus can help you detect these changes real time and of course, configure alerts. Right. Last but not the least, we've got the Active Directory Services Restore Mode account. Now, this is a pre-class account with an Active Directory. So any user who has access to this particular account can log on to Active Directory as an emergency administrator. Right. So the internal memory can be used to basically dump the credentials of the Active Directory DSRM account. The DSRM account is nothing but the administrator account or the local administrator account. That's what it is by default. And once an attacker has access to this particular account, the account can be used to log on, to emergency log on into Active Directory. And that's something that has to be looked into, right? The DSRM account's password is typically never reset. So they have basic passwords like laptop at 123 or password at 123 or administrator at 123. Passwords like that are typically used for the DSRM accounts or for the local admin account in this case, which happens to be the DSRM account. And these accounts can be attacked and the credentials to those accounts can be obtained and emergency admin access can be granted to Active Directory. Now, there's a lot we saw today. There were 10 attacks that we looked into today, but the list simply goes on. There are a lot of ways Active Directory can be compromised. Now, let me show you a really simple example right here. If I head on to my domain, all right, you see something called a password spray script right here. I'm just going to copy it and paste it right here, right? And let me show you what's going to happen. So as an end user with no privileges, simply open up PowerShell. All right. Let me quickly increase the size of it so you can view this a little better. And I am going to head to the desktop. And I'm going to run a command called PowerShell.exe/exec and then bypass. And I'm going to run a command called import module./domain password spray.ps1, just a straightforward PowerShell script, nothing fancy happening here. And I'm going to type in a command called invoke domain password spray, and I'm going to give in a password which happens to be password at 123. Predictable, weak password, but still used in most organizations. I'm just going to hit confirm, and within a few seconds, here we have a list of users and their passwords. Right? So predictable passwords are something that have to be eliminated, that sadly still exist in most organizations, and an attacker using a simple script that is undetected by most antiviruses and anti-malware tools can basically compromise Active Directory. Right? But Log360 can help you with that because Log360 has a module called PowerShell auditing, and using that, Log360 can detect scripts when they are run by your end users. Right? So the list simply goes on. A user can simply plug in a USB device into an end user's workstation, which brings me to another point of mine here. So if I head on to my group policies, there is a point here called allow users to use media source while elevated. So if a user basically enters a removable disk onto your system, the disk will have administrative privileges. So if a user enters a disk with Mimikatz, Mimikatz can potentially be run with administrative privileges, and that's something that has to be looked into. So whenever USB devices are plugged into your endpoints, you'll have to look into it. You'll have to look into misconfigurations as well. If there are an unusual amount of logon failures from strange IP addresses, that's something you have to look into as well. And Log360 can help you with that. So if I head into reports, you find something called user logon reports right here that basically shows you logon failures on your domain, right? So if there is a logon failure that's happened at the same time for multiple accounts, it could be a potential password attack attempt. You could simply head into your admin tab, configuration tab, create an alert profile where you can set a threshold based alert. If there are more than 10 logon failures occurring within a minute, it could be an automated password attack. So please run this alert, notify my admin, notify my help desk, and disable the user account or terminate the user account who's performing the particular attack. Right? So the list simply goes on. A new process can be started by most malicious tools out there. A service can be started. A scheduled task can be created to run a malicious script in the background, or it could even be a simple deviation into a user's behavior. For example, if a user logs on to a domain controller for the first time, it is a malicious activity, and that's something that has to be looked into. Right? If a user is basically moving a lot of files from one location to another, that's malicious, and that's something that has to be looked into as well. And Log360 can help you with that. So if I head into analytics right here, this will show you analytics based on your user behaviors, right? So if a user basically logs on to a host for the first time, it could be a malicious thing. If there's an unusual logon time on a particular domain controller or a sensitive server, it could be a malicious activity. If there are an unusual amount of files or folders accessed, deleted, or moved, or if there are an unusual amount of processes on a particular server, if there are user accounts that are being modified in bulk, if a critical admin account has a password changed, all of these activities are outside the ordinary, are outside the normal, and they have to be brought to notice and they have to be alerted upon, and Log360 can do that for you. So Log360, not just for your Active Directory, but for your entire network. So if you have Azure, if you have AWS, if you have Google Cloud, if you have network devices like Sophos or Barracuda, if you have databases, if you have Hyper-V machines, everything can be brought to control with Log360, because Log360 takes logs from all of these systems, all of these devices in your network, brings them under one roof, allows you to search through them, allows you to filter through them, and most of it has pre-configured reports and alerts. So all you got to do is just install it and you're good to go, right? So that is about it for today. But before I end today's session, I would like to run a quick poll just to know your thoughts on something. This is just for our internal team. So this will just take a few seconds, and I promise I will be out of your hair. So yes, thank you so much for your time today. If you've got any questions, you can always drop an email to me at abi@manageengine.com. That's abi@manageengine.com anytime, and I'd be more than happy to help you out. Thank you so much for your time today. I hope you found this session informative, and I would love to see you for my next one. Thank you so much. Stay home, stay safe, and have a wonderful day today. Thank you. Bye-bye.